I'm Brody Vinson, and you're watching Profession Session. In today's interview, I had the pleasure of talking to Dr. Tim OBrien.
You have to have a focus and an intention in order to go where you want to go.
DBA and professor of strategic marketing and of management.
So what's next? I was having success and I looked around, I'm like, I'm not even 30 years old yet.
As well as a business owner, father, and a senior VP of business development for a large event marketing company.
Full circle, I got back into event marketing.
In this episode, he'll teach you the many principles that he teaches every week to Masters of Business Administration students, whether it be how to position yourself or your business in the market.
Your real value actually means like, what is my superpower?
How to network your way to anything, whether it be a free trip to Italy or an incredible new career position or many other things.
What is that value exchange that you could give, or the reason that they would take their time out for you?
And how to navigate the current landscape of social media that he believes needs government regulation.
People care more about the opinions of strangers than people who love them.
Stay around for a very insightful, action-oriented, and value-driven conversation.
Thinking about the value exchange, value for value, opens the door to paths of least resistance as opposed to like the path of most resistance, which is often unfortunate.
Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Profession Session. I'm Brody Vinson, and I'm on a mission not only to define professional greatness through the tactics and qualities behind it, but also to help anyone that's trying to achieve professional greatness do it through the lens of others that have achieved it before them. I couldn't be more thankful for everyone that helps me continue along this mission through being able to do this podcast. And if you've ever gotten any value out of it, I ask only two things in return. If you could share it in the same way that you found it with someone else that you think could get value, it helps me so much. And if you could also just hit the subscribe button if you haven't yet, it helps me so much in just securing better and better guests for the show to share more impactful knowledge with you in this pursuit that we're both on for professional greatness. So without further ado, let's get on to this week's episode.
Yeah, so I grew up in Michigan. I played basketball. It was like my big sport. So I played basketball in college, and that was like the first portion of my life, if you will. What started professionally, like my first real job out of college. So I worked for an event marketing firm, and our account at the time was Quest Communications. I think they're a telecom company. I think today they're like CenturyLink or something similar.
Okay.
So basically for like a year and a half, I was living out of a suitcase in hotels with like 2 to 3 other people just traveling the country and doing events. So we would set up like a tent, a booth, and more or less like sell out of it and market the company's services, like TV, internet, cell phone, like the whole thing, which was so cool for a couple reasons. Like one, I hadn't really traveled that much. You take like your family vacations to Florida and stuff like that, but you haven't like traveled. So
Usually
I got to
probably hit all the touristy spots.
Oh yeah, it's like we went to really all over the country doing this. So it's like I got way out west, I'm in the Midwest, I'm in central and mountain regions, like really cool experience, and you're more or less getting paid to do your job. And at the same time, I was right out of college, so I didn't have like an apartment. I parked my car in my mom's garage.
Wow.
So it's like you're just kind of like, if you're smart with your money, like storing up money.
Yeah.
So that was awesome experience for sure. I realized close to 2 years in, I was like, wow, this is a lot. Like to imagine just living out of a suitcase, like straight up, like you're not really going home other than maybe a few days at a time.
To get exhausting a little
Oh
bit,
yeah, exhausted, burnout. You're like, do I really? One day you're super happy, the next you're like, do I really want to do this anymore? And then I got an opportunity to interview down here in Orlando for a startup in media, and got offered a job, and so I left the suitcase role to slowly go back into the suitcase role later on as like a salesperson, but this time on airplanes and so forth. So that's what got me down here to Orlando. I worked at that startup for like a decade. Several years in, I was like, man, this is great. Like love learning, love the experience, but I want to do more. You know, you get that itch kind of every few years. I'm like, so what's next? And I was having success. I had a good income, and I looked around. I'm like, I'm not even 30 years old yet. Like, if I take a step back, I'm going to get like a pay cut if I go work at, you know, one of the theme parks in town or something, and my title is going to change all this. So I actually enrolled in the doctorate program that was just starting at Rollins at Crummer Graduate School of Business. So I got my DBA there in marketing, and that was the big next step. So after that, I wanted something new. I got my degree. Let's try something new. Worked in tech. That took me to large software development company actually based out of Ukraine. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, really cool. Got to go there a couple times, work with folks in Ukraine, Poland, Bulgaria. Spent about 2 years there. 2 years working for a VR startup out of Sarasota area. And then that got me to my current role, which is at a company called EventLink that's headquartered in the Detroit area. So full circle, I got back into event marketing.
It was always meant to be.
Where I started like 13 years later. And then in addition to that, where we met, I'm a professor. So I'm not full-time in that sense, but I kind of look at it as like a paid hobby, if you will. So I've taught online programs and still do. I've taught at UCF in their MBA program, and Rollins College, Crummer Graduate School of Business in their MBA program. So yeah, that's something I really enjoy, and I enjoy meeting the students, interacting with the students, most of my students being adult students, which is cool.
Yeah, so we met basically, I was in your strategic marketing management class last semester, and the thing that struck me, we talked about this off air a little bit, but the thing that struck me about just how you taught and the lens you taught through is just how wide and deep your knowledge went as far as marketing across like all channels, all types of industries. A little context, every class you would have someone kind of zoom in at the beginning that was involved in marketing and strategic marketing management to some degree with some huge company. And we got this really interesting kind of variety through that. How did you develop such a wide and deep knowledge, do you think? Where did that come from?
Yeah, I think there's one word I don't like is expert, especially in like marketing or social media. Like it's just so big, right? Like you can't be an expert on every platform and everything. So finding people that know things that you don't know and are an expert at a particular niche is like something I've tried to always apply early on. Like I don't even need to know everything. I just need that person on my team that knows it, right? So that's an important piece. How I got into meeting people so much, really when I was at the startup here in Orlando, I was on an airplane like every other week. I'm in New York, I'm in LA, I'm in San Francisco, meeting with like 5 appointments a day, and really just developing relationships with people that ended up clients or not end up clients. And as you know, folks move around a lot more now than they did, a decade ago even. So folks are in new roles every 2 to 4 years, it seems like today. And as that movement happens, you're meeting new people as well. So I think keeping that relationship's important though. Like once you establish it, even if you move into a new industry, if there's people that you like working with, like stay in touch. And it's pretty easy to stay in touch, right? Like we have social media, we have LinkedIn, we have emails, we have text message, but take the 2 minutes to even send that note like 1 week a year or something that's like, hey, how things going? Even if they're not your client or you're not working with them professionally today.
Just check in here.
Yeah, especially if you like them. Like it's like most of your clients you're actually going to like or people you work with. So
I want to talk about relationship building a little bit more because that seems kind of like a key to the success that you've had to a certain degree. What are some ways that you think your relationship building has changed over the years for the better? And how can that help?
Yeah, I think, so interestingly enough, like my dissertation, I really focused on social influence principles and understanding why we gravitate towards certain people and also how to use those principles for your own success and business success and personal success and so forth. But, I think over the years, what I realized, and I know we chatted briefly about this, like networking, I think there's like a misconception on that. Like we all learn networking and we instantly go to networking as like, gosh, it's this big room at like a conference where there's hundreds of people. Some people have cocktails or whatever. And like that mixer is our networking. And that does still somewhat exist, right? But it doesn't have to be that. You shouldn't be, and if you're in that situation, you shouldn't be intimidated by that because everybody's in that situation. So go there, try to make like one or two contacts out of that in the sense of like, hey, I met this great guy or met this great girl. Here's what she does. Here's how we could do something together forward. And maybe that's like being on their podcast or whatever it is. Like that can start that relationship. I learned pretty quick, especially being in sales. I was like, if I'm going to be any good at this or successful at this, like I need to make these relationships. I need to make genuine relationships. And if you have like good products, generally there's enough relationships out there because you're not going to vibe with everybody. Like everybody's not going to like you. You're not going to like everybody. But finding the people that you have that common ground with and starting a business relationship, it also leads to a personal relationship or a friendship, or that's pretty unique for sure. So that's kind of like in the physical sense when we're face to face. Like, what do we do? How does this work?
Yeah, I think there's such a fear behind those networking events because people haven't done them, and you just imagine it being this thing where you have to meet everyone and you have to like connect with everyone. But
yeah, and it's like I would say more people are introverted today or feel that way. I'm for the most part pretty introverted. I can turn it on when needed, but also you can kind of have to like force yourself. It's easy to stay at home and like turn on Netflix and but the reality is it's like the other day my neighbor was having a party, and most of my neighbors are older than me by 10 to 30 years. But it's like, I know that there's going to be like 20 some people over there, and I just got to pop in for an hour or two and like have fun. Like I get to drink, eat, meet people, have conversations, and you never know what's going to come from that. Like there's no agenda to that. Like, but the reality is you're going to ask personal questions. You're going to get to know each other. Maybe down the road, something does happen from that. But I think people need to like, it's not even putting themselves out there. It's like walk across the street for a couple hours, have some fun, and you never know where that'll go just from meeting that one person.
I think this ties in perfectly to the value exercise. I want to get into that a little bit because I think this comes into play really well, and kind of I think it's a strong principle of being able to network properly. Could you give a little bit of background on this, to just context-wise? This is something that you had us go over in class that really stuck with me and I resonated with a lot.
Sure. So I would say probably 7-8 years into my professional career, if you will, just meeting all these people and going to these places, I started realizing like how interconnected folks were. And then social media, particularly LinkedIn, I think pointed that out further. If you look at LinkedIn, and if you're on it regularly, semi-regularly, you'll realize like you're generally one person or two persons removed from anybody. So very rarely on LinkedIn will it say like the third connection. Like now we're all second degrees away from everybody. So that means you know a person that knows a person that may know the Pope, or you know a person that knows a person that knows the president. And the reality is like you do. Like if I'm Catholic, most likely my priest at my place knows somebody that knows the Pope, or he may know him himself. So if that's your goal, to like meet the Pope, if you will, what do you want to do? Like, how do you want to get there? Because the Pope's not just going to take the meeting because Brody, my friend, knows the Pope, and hey, I want you to meet this guy. Like, the Pope's a pretty busy guy. Lots of people want to meet him and be blessed by him, right?
I think he's got quite a list of people who want to be
Yeah, so then it's kind of like, what is that value exchange that you could give the Pope, or the reason that they would take their time out for you? So maybe it is something to do with your charity, or an idea that you have could help grow the parishioner base or something. What is that hook? So that's a big piece of it. I think the other piece of the value side of stuff is, and why I looked at that, is a lot of folks know the value of an item, right? So let's say we go to 7-Eleven and we want to buy a Coca-Cola. I don't what's a bottle of 20 ounces around $2 probably, something like $2.25 today. Like, we know that value. We know value of products really well, so that if we go to that same Coke and we're at a theme park and that Coke's all of a sudden $6, we kind of go, because it's like, gosh, that's not what we're used to. But we don't put value on ourselves in the sense of like, what is our real skill set? Like, what can I bring to the table? And a lot of times we're used to in an interview answering those questions like, who are you? Or like, what are your 3 strengths? And we'll say, oh, we're hardworking, or I'm persistent, or this and that. But it's further than that. Like, your real value actually means like, what can I do for this company? Or what do I bring to the table that nobody else can do? Like, what is my superpower? And I realized, and I actually had a mentor point it out to me, they're like, Tim, your real power is like, not that you just have connections, but when to like pull those people into the mix. Like, hey, I know Brody and he does this, and you guys can do this together and have success together. Like, you guys should connect. Or I know this person and I need them for this job right now to make this deal happen or this opportunity. And you guys are both making an exchange where it's like mutually beneficial. So that's where the value for value piece. But that was when I really realized like, my value that I bring to the table is my connections, but also like how to bring those into the mix where I'm grabbing the right tool to build this thing. And that tool is often a person that we're using. And it doesn't work if that person doesn't like you, enjoy you, know that you're credible, know that you have integrity, all the above, right?
And that comes from the relationship that you've built.
Over years. It could be days, it could be years, it could be one project that you did together. It could be because you said like, hey, Tim's a good guy, like you should connect with him, like I vouch for him. Like, there's different ways that comes into play, but that's just it. Like, what is your own value, and then how do I use that to kind of get where I want to go?
For a young person, maybe first entering the career market or early on in it, how do you identify that value in yourself, or like identify maybe the sprouts of that value and start to build on that and really expand on that?
Yeah, it's hard, to be honest, because the reality is people are like, how do you, I don't feel as a person like, it seems like you're always improving, always growing. I always say like, I don't know what I want to do when I grow up. Like, it feels like you're planning, but things change, right? I think for young people, especially as a professor, like folks come to me and they're like, hey, can you help me with a career? Like, I know you know a lot of people, and I always say like, well, what do you want to do specifically? Like, and it doesn't have to be exact, but like, what do you want to do? Is there an industry that you want to work in? What market do you want to work in? Do you want to work remotely? Do you want to work in New York City? Are there any markets you wouldn't work in? Do you have a dream company that you want to work with? And I would say, to be honest, like the person that's coming up can't answer even generally one of those 3. So it's like, start off with that, and then I say, come back to me with that. If they come back to me, I know that they're serious about it, like they're serious about their search and their efforts and wanting me to help. And some come back, some don't. And that's where you have to start. Like, you have to have a focus and an intention in order to go where you want to go. And it's not going to be your dream job. Like, I'm not saying, hey, I want to be the CEO of Disney. That's great, but like, where are we starting?
That's some stiff competition.
Yeah, where are we starting? Because last time I checked, Disney is not hiring 25-year-old CEOs at the moment. So where do we start, and then go from there? And then I can help with introductions, especially like if I can vouch for you, if I know you enough as a student, and the work that you put in and your capabilities, then we can go from there. So it's really refining, focus, have intention, and then let's aim for that thing and go for it. And I always say, like, try to get somewhere between like 3 to 5, like, here's where I want to go. Because if the net's 15, it's still too big.
15 years versus 3 to 5 years?
15, like, companies or 15
Okay.
positions. Yeah, like we really got to refine it and be focused.
I think that's a good point because it's so easy to get paralysis by analysis in the world that we live in. I mean, you go on LinkedIn and they're like, we were talking about this, I think, off air. There's so many just easy apply options, and a lot of people will just go straight for that
just
and
click,
apply for like 200 jobs and just hope that one of them catches.
Right. And you realize, especially this happens more as your career goes on, like recruiters will find you because of your LinkedIn profile, because of your skill set, because it's refined. Like they found you via the tools because you have the exact skill set they're looking for. So you kind of have to reverse it. If you're going out and marketing yourself, like I need to refine myself and my skill set and then get it out there. But that's how recruiters refine you. They're doing what we just said with the tools on LinkedIn to find that person. And, if you're lucky enough, they land on you if that's the opportunity that fits.
Yeah, I talked to kind of a recruiter coach recently, and he said you want to really reach out to recruiters and ask what they're looking for too. And a lot of times I think if you're very intentional about that kind of thing, you can kind of almost reverse engineer like how to get the job you want. I mean, if you have a particular job that you want, you could go look and see exactly what it takes and then customize your resume to that, or fill in the gaps that you don't have if there's a skill that you need.
Yeah, and going back to the networking piece, like there's a lot of value, especially if you're an alumni of a particular school. There's value in networking with alumni. It depends on the school too, like the quality of alumni in terms of like the overall level of success. Like Harvard's going to have higher up executives than maybe a community college, right? So that all comes into play, but those are pieces of value. It's like, well, how do I use this little tool here? Because I have that degree and they have that degree. And maybe they were on the basketball team or the football team, and I played on the football team too, even though they're 20 years older than me. Like there's all these social influence principles. They're like common denominators that'll like help you go to where you want to go. But again, it's like that intention. It's all bringing back in the intention of like, here's the game plan, here's the strategy to do this.
I think this is an interesting pivot to marketing too, because you mentioned marketing yourself. And obviously I was in your marketing class. I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about just marketing principles in general, kind of coming off of this. What are maybe like the top 3 just overall principles? That's an incredibly broad question.
Yeah.
So we could go more specific if that helps. But
yeah, I mean, marketing, I think a lot of us are obviously more aware of like how products are marketed, why I'm getting targeted. Like we're just more aware today than when I was in college and, we're learning out of textbooks and so forth. The biggest thing I think is like, especially when starting a company, people they don't know what their core like value proposition is often. Like answering 2 questions like, why would a customer come here? Would they be willing to pay for this service? Would I myself pay for this service? And if you yourself wouldn't, then probably nobody else will, right?
Yeah.
So that's the biggest thing is like, I call it the mirror check, like looking in the mirror. Would I pay this? Would I respond to this ad? That's, things that we're missing a lot still. Like even big brands miss that with all the agencies and all the people they have working for them. Like they still miss, they swing and they miss. But that's the biggest one that I would say to start. Like, what is your value proposition as a business, as a product? You got to start there and really like hone in on it.
I want to talk about social media as well. I think that there's a whole nother layer to that now, because obviously we were talking a little bit off air about how things have evolved during your career, and social media has become a huge part of that. You talked a little bit about how you teach different social media principles in one of your classes now. How has social media changed that over the course of your career, and what are things that people need to be aware of?
Yeah, I think we're at an inflection point now where brands are making an adjustment, right? Like it happened where we're buying ads or placing ads on Facebook and Instagram and so forth and paying for those paid media posts. And then you had the influencer wave that, has lasted several years now. And it seems to be like going through a rephase, which is focused more on smaller influencers at times than the big celebrity type names, like true celebrities. So that's interesting. And then I think the third wave's coming where it's like people are being a little more honest around like, I can't just market any product because the product people are going to find out if the product's actually good or no good. So that like de-influencing or being, I would just call it being honest about products, regardless if you're being paid or non-paid for them, is like the next big thing. But all of us as a society, I see, we're getting better at spotting what's real, what's fake, and then what does that mean for us as individuals. The other thing I brought up in class that I think is important, like we're still not talking enough about like the mental health around social media. No, for adults for one, but most certainly for youth, and like what does that look like? And to be honest, personally, it's like there needs to be a Surgeon General's warning on this stuff. Like we have it on cigarettes for, you got to be 18 years old to buy it. You got to be 21 years old to drink alcohol. Like there's no Surgeon General's warning on this stuff. And I think that's an oversight right now that I'm highly concerned about as a parent of 3. Like my kids won't be touching it anytime soon, that's for sure.
I wanted to go that direction, actually. I thought that was interesting, and I remember this being like a huge debate that we got into. Not debate, but like this huge talk that we got into one class where like the whole class was chiming in with like different perspectives around this.
Sure.
I think that's a really interesting point, that the Surgeon's General point that you made. There's so much unknown around it right now, and I think the government struggles to keep up. Is that something that you see happening in the future? Do you think that's possible?
It's going to happen. It's probably just like anything else. I think for it to move, something bad, very bad has to happen. And bad things have happened, right? Like there's things that you can correlate that started on social media to mass shootings, school shootings, like bullying, other things like that. I think the biggest thing, like if you can simplify it the most, the one thing I would say is, especially to parents, I do 2 things. One, make a list of the pros and cons of my 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 16-year-old being on social media. The reality in the pros column, you're probably going to have 2 to 3 items. The negative and the cons I might be able to use this whole pamphlet here, Brody. That's one thing. The other thing I would say is what's changed so much is youth, people in general, but most certainly youth, like you don't want to care about the opinion of people, of strangers, more than you care about the opinion of your best friends, your parents, your siblings, people that actually genuinely love you and care about you. So I was raised, one of your first principles is don't talk to strangers. Like you don't talk to strangers. One of the first things, like look both ways when you cross the street, don't talk to strangers. Now, unfortunately, I think people care more about the opinions of strangers, people they don't know at all, than people who love them. And like that's, if you boil it down, like it's that simple. And that's what's wrong with social media. Why do you give a crap about somebody who knows nothing about you and what they're going to remark on what you have to say? Like,
such a good point. It really is. I mean, it's kind of a reality check when you realize that all of a sudden. I have those kinds of moments constantly, actually, just because of this podcast, and I promote it through social media. So I have these moments all the time where I'm like, oh, like this post is not performing well, or this clip didn't do well, and then someone close to it, like an actual person in my life, will like give me some compliment or just like be there for me for some other thing, and I'm like, oh, things are okay. I have people in my life that care about me.
Yeah.
It's a reality check. It's grounding.
And so that can obviously be hurtful mentally. And then I think the other piece of that is like the shares, the likes, the comment. It's like this fake sense of success. Well, it's not success. Like most of us aren't getting paid because we got a certain amount of likes and shares and comments and so forth. Like that's not success. Like success means that you put in hard work, you had emotional response to that hard work and achieved it. Like success doesn't come without work and effort. And social media allows the false feeling of success because of that adrenaline rush of all the likes and so forth. And that's not good. Like success comes with effort, not without effort. And
I like that definition a lot. I ask people on the show, how do you define success, pretty often, actually, and I've never heard it put quite like that.
Yeah.
Could you give that one more time?
So success only comes with effort. And social media, the falsehood of it is you can have that feeling of success, the adrenaline rush that you get from it, the dopamine, like actual chemical dopamine, without effort. So if you boil that down to you leaving the gym, having a great workout, you're feeling wonderful. Your body feels great. You actually have real dopamine because you've worked out for an hour. Unfortunately, social media gives you that dopamine rush without the effort. And that's why folks, particularly young people, I feel like they're going to be less willing to go out and work and do the things that require that real effort to success. So take it away. Like if they want to play with it for a little bit at night, not in their bed, not in their room, but certain time periods, but you got to get out there. You got to have the effort. You got to have the real dopamine rush, not the one that social media applies.
I remember you talking about this particular point and how it was really important for you to instill the ability to find that through hard work for your kids without getting it from social media. And I always think it's fascinating that if you talk to people who really understand social media and marketing and anything in that realm, I mean, you go to the very top and you hear about executives from Google or from Apple. They don't let their kids use social media, or Instagram. Like the social media executives themselves don't really let their kids use social media because they understand that.
Yeah, you understand work, effort. Like the reality is too, if you really looked as a parent, like I watched for this, kids want to be kids. Like they want to get out and ride bikes. They want to be on the courts. Like they want to go play on slides in the playground. But it's easy for them to fall in the trap, or it's easy as a busy parent to, just put a tablet or a phone in front of them. So that's the thing. I think what's hard, and as parents, I would say, this isn't like when we were kids, and I say when I know I'm older than you, but, when you're growing up and it's like, I want a pair of Jordans, Mom, like everybody has Jordans, and they're $100 or $150, whatever they were, I think that's good. Like that then was, the parent that's a big deal. Like you're honoring your kid's work or effort or being a good kid. Like here's this. Don't confuse that with giving your kid social media. Like those are entirely two different. It's not the same thing. It's not a pair of Jordans. It's not like, and if that means they're not cool, then I guess that's what it is. So what's worth being cool? Like, being cool because you're on social and potentially opening yourself to emotional distress and worse, or I didn't have this and having successful, well-balanced brain in the future.
Yeah, you build a better foundation that way.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to separate social media from marketing. I'm just saying on the social side for youth, like you really got to be careful.
Do you think there's a magic number as far as like the age that someone is actually ready to embrace that and to handle that kind of that thing?
Yeah, I think the age comes with time on the apps. Like your brain levels out, it would seem, because we've probably all seen folks who are older that get on social media for the first time. Like maybe your uncle or your dad or your grandpa joins Facebook, and they're having extreme reactions to certain content or sharing content that you were like, geez, I didn't see that coming, sort of thing. So it would seem to be like we all need to learn and level off of what the reality is. I think there's a learning curve when we get into these systems. It's like when I started using TikTok, not necessarily for myself, but to educate and get into it, I saw the structure of it and I was like, oh my gosh, they're creating this addiction. How can I post something and literally within seconds, hundreds of people have seen it around the world? That's crazy. Not really how an Instagram or Facebook is set up. And that's why I was like, that's why all these young people are so addicted to it. Cause it's in that instant fame, that instant dopamine rush. That's 1,000 people have seen me in seconds.
It's like a slot machine.
Yeah, that's not normal.
Yeah, it's definitely not.
To boil down, that's not normal.
I mean, we saw Congress almost, I don't know how close they actually got, but we saw them at least make some kind of attempt at shutting down TikTok. Do you think that that's something that still might happen?
I think probably more interesting to see is what state by state is happening on the local level, like in Montana and so forth. Again,
I'm
I
actually
don't
not
think
updated on that,
so.
what happened there.
And I'm not perfect to this, but Montana passed a law that TikTok's no longer allowed in the state. So they're like the
Wow.
first to pass. I don't know how you block it, or I'm sure there's workarounds and so forth, right?
Yeah.
As an individual, but
That's wild.
it would seem to be like they're more focused on, that being a Chinese-owned company than like health, because the same issues would be on really multiple social platforms in terms of like youth health, and that's where I'm more concerned, because people are going to say what they want to say and do what they want to do on social, especially if you're an adult. Freedom of speech, whatever, go for it. But I think with kids, like, that's where my concern is, like, what is that age limit? And if cigarettes are 18, to me, like, that's probably a good starting point.
It's so hard to quantify like what the effect is. I think that's where the challenge comes in, and we've seen that the government has a really tough time. I mean, if you watch some of the like Congress trials, they couldn't even really define what's going on, wrap their heads around it. So I think it's such a challenge, but
Yeah.
I think it has to come from the actual algorithmic things that are going on, and has to come from the actual like age restrictions. I think you're right.
Yeah, and hopefully it'll be done one day. I don't know what that is, but again, I think like anything else, and on the youth side and parenting, like, you got to take care of your own home to begin with, like what that means for you in your own household. I'm not saying that every kid isn't capable of doing this. Maybe there are kids that can, but I think by and large, it's probably not. I've heard more bad stories than good, and I think most parents, if you're like, hey, wouldn't you like it if Jimmy was like hanging out with friends in person more, or going to the bowling alley on Friday nights, like what, like just kids being kids versus the stress of social media. I think the other piece that's missing about it is, it's not like bullying perhaps when I was a child. Like in school, you're in school, and you could get bullied in school, like 100%. But once you get off the school bus or back into your parents' car, you're at home, you're in your safe space, you're with people again that love you, and at least for 12 hours or so, and on the weekends, you're safe and okay, and that can escape your mind. I think now with social, it just follows you, and like that's what's scary, is like they can never escape it, they can never get to their safe place, and that's the part that stinks. Like so those are the pieces that I'm like, guys, like it's right here, and you got to take matters in your own hands, regardless if it's social media or the welfare of your children. Like, don't think the government's going to come in and save you in any aspect of your life, or politicians. Like, you got to do for yourself first. So that's what I would recommend.
So it starts in the home. I think I'm interested because it starts in the home, obviously, and by extension, I think it starts with the parents kind of figuring out their own use of social media. Could you talk a little bit about the way that you use social media and how that's maybe helped you with this perspective? And
Sure. I'm probably an anomaly because, again, it's like I teach digital marketing and social media. So professionally, I have to be on it. We have a small business that I share with my sister-in-law, and with that, we market our business. I have clients that, have an aspect of social media in their marketing efforts and so forth. So for professionally, I have to be there. I don't know entirely would I be there if I didn't have to be professionally. I'd like to think that I could just unplug it and be cool with it and probably be a happier person because of it. I think individually, again, people don't stop and think enough about their emotions when they're on it. Like, are you happy? Are you sad? Are you angry? Are you bitter? Like, pause as you're scrolling and think about that. And it could be different on different apps, potentially, but that would be a big thing of like, is this healthy and why should I be on it? But yeah, I would say the majority of me being on it is curiosity. Like, what are marketers doing? What should I be doing? Like, I have to be there professionally. And then secondary to that, like, I do like getting news and information from it as well. Like, that's where a lot of us start our news journey, and then maybe we'll research more, like once we see something, or hopefully we do, not just read the headline. But that would be the other piece. I mean, I like keeping in touch with family and friends and so forth, but there's other ways to do that too.
Yeah, there's other ways that are better for your mental health.
That's been around for hundreds of years.
Yeah,
so.
You could pick up your phone and text or call someone.
Correct.
I think that it's such a good point. You kind of mentioned, like, what is your mood when you're going on to it? Is that something that you try to actively think about, like try to limit yourself from going on to it when you're in a certain mood?
I wouldn't say the mood, because I'm not somebody that's like going to proactively do a rage post or something like that. I very rarely post, to be honest. It's just not like who I am. Like, I grew up, I just remember like your parents or my parents telling me, like, you know, let your actions speak for you, like not your words. And I think that goes back to playing basketball. Like, show them on the court. Like, don't talk trash. Like, show them what you can do. So I think that's carried into how I use social media. Like, I don't post selfies. And generally it's like if I post, it's one of my kids doing something, which probably nobody wants to see anyway. But so that's kind of my use. But yeah, I think I know for a fact, like I've seen something that's upset me, angered me, like made me feel bitter or jealous. Like, those are the emotions like you don't want. Like, why would me opening something make me feel this way? And that's where we have to be conscious of, you know, that's not good. Like, if you were just in a good mood before opening that app, like, and you saw something, maybe a friend posted or a piece of news or whatever it was, like, that's not good. So
one thing I've found that's really good is just taking little breaks too. It's just like some of the little moments that you wouldn't think would make much of a difference, but have made a huge difference for me, is literally just little things like if I'm going into a store, just leaving my phone in the car, or just walking in and just being present in the moment.
Yeah.
I think it's important to get
And
out
that's
of
what I love. It's like between being at the gym and even then you have your headphones in, like you're listening to music. Like, that's important. Like exercising an hour a day or whatever you can get in. I'm on the tennis courts with my daughter generally like 2 to 3 hours a day. Like, there's no phone there. Like, she's training, I'm helping her train. Like, having those breaks, I don't think a lot of people get that opportunity. Like, they're either multi-screening throughout the day or whatever it is. Like, so yeah, I would completely agree. Like, figure out what those breaks are for you, because you don't need it. Like, it'll still be there. You can come back to it. All the multi-billions of people will still be there. Don't worry, they're not going anywhere.
And when emergencies happened 100 years ago, people still dealt with them and figured it out.
Yeah. So I hope we're getting to an inflection where folks start learning that. It may be a couple more years. We'll see.
It takes time for people to adjust. Often, like you said before, sometimes something bad has to happen for that to happen.
And I always have a student, like, every semester that's, like, on no social media. And that person's happy. Like, coincidentally, I'm like, you're smiling, you seem happy, you don't seem stressed. Like, there's got to be some sort of correlation there.
Yeah, I think so too. I want to circle back to something else, that kind of a different area as well. You mentioned your dissertation earlier and how you did it on social influence principles. And I wanted to talk about the management that you teach too. I think that probably ties in. What are some of the biggest principles of good management or good leadership that you have learned throughout your career or that you teach?
Sure. So I know I said earlier, finding people that have the skills that you don't have and putting them on your team. So I think any successful, executive, CEO, people who are like dreamed as the golden prize of that, they're going to also say that. Like, what their weakness is, they want a person with their strength next to them. And that, I think that takes a certain level of like understanding your own strengths, but also being okay. Like, I don't have to be good at everything, and this person isn't going to take my job. They're not going to take or overcome what I'm doing. So that's probably the harder piece of that, because sometimes folks can get jealous of like, well, that person is talented and I don't have that talent. Like,
and they're shining.
Yeah, exactly. And taking back to tennis, it's like if you're playing doubles, like you want your partner to have a certain skill that you don't have, right? So that's a big one. in terms of like the influence and principles and social influence in general, there's certain pieces that go back to like the value exchange and stuff too. A lot of times folks don't understand like what reciprocation truly means. So, there's a labeling, right, of like people trying to move up or social climb or as an opportunist. So that's different from reciprocation, right? Like an opportunist is like take, smash and grab, I'm out of here. Reciprocation is like, okay, this person did something for me. How do I do something for them? And that also is that value exchange. If you learn that principle of reciprocation, you're going to go real far places. And I don't even want to say that it's like saving a favor for later. Mm-hmm. It's like an understood language of business and successful people is like, you did something for me, I'll do something for you. It's almost, being like a good Southern person, like welcoming and reciprocating. And sometimes that's lost, but the people that go further and make more connections and have more success, it's because they're really good at reciprocating in business and in their personal life too.
I find that those types of people often just lead with providing value to people too, whether it seems like it'll bring them any kind of return or not.
Sure.
Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But
it's believing in that person. Like you said, it's like I know that person and I know they're going to probably repay this one day.
Yeah.
In some way or another. One day could be tomorrow, one day could be 10 years from now, whatever it is. Because you also know the same people that, you may look at the phone once a week. It's like, oh gosh, she's calling again. What does she want this time? We have those people in our lives, our family, friends, whatever they are. This is not that. This is the exact opposite of that, where it's like we have something. So before we were chatting, I said the other day, I was like at my daughter's tennis academy, and the head coach there, I connected him with a tennis equipment manufacturer. And I was like, hey, I know that CEO really well. Like, if you're looking for balls, rackets, so forth, like, you guys should do a partnership together. Like, there's probably an opportunity there. And so they're meeting, like, this week. And it's not like there's anything in it for me. If you pull it back, there probably is, in the sense that it's like, well, if they're paying less for balls and strings and rackets out of pocket, that means my daughter's tuition's not going to go up.
Yeah.
Like inflation, right? So it's like, if you boil it down, like that's probably the quickest return of like, well, this will get a lot of money off of their books if they can set up a sponsorship deal. So that's the quick return there. But also it's like, he's on the court with my daughter. He already cares a ton. So it's like, he's going to care even more if he thinks I helped him out in some way or another. Mm-hmm. And it's so easy, and it's like, these are people that I both care about. That's like, you guys should meet up. Like, there's an opportunity for you both here. And that's, I think, like, I guess the win-win-win scenario for everybody. But I think that's a really good example of, like, that's how reciprocation works. That's how exchanging value works. And then I'm sure it'll grow from there.
I think it's important to be looking for those opportunities, like, to be actively looking for them and, like, kind of paying attention to opportunities.
Especially early on. Like, if this is a new thing for you, or you're hearing this kind of the first time, because sometimes you learn through business school or high school or something, somebody teaches you about goal setting, and this is kind of like the next step of that. Like, you've learned how to goal set, but like, how do I really go places I want to go, and how do I integrate people in that process? This is that next step of that. So it does take a minute to learn it, but once it's like innate and natural, like you just said, it's starting to become natural for you, or has become natural, where you're just looking for it all the time involuntarily. That's what it is. Like me sitting there with the tennis coach giving the lesson, like that's involuntary. Like my mind's just become natural to look for it, and it takes time to do that. I think like in class, a lot of times, like I'll point out this value for value exercise, and it's like, think about the things that you'd like to do, like not just professionally, but do you want to go to Italy on vacation? Do you want to run a marathon? And what people do you need to get there? And if somebody says, I want to go to Italy for vacation, but I have to save up money, and I'm like, no. Like, yes, that could be one way, But the reality is, if we're in a classroom, I'm like, there's 30 people in this classroom. What do you think the odds are that somebody has a house in Italy that they own, or somebody's aunt maybe has a house in Italy that they own, and they need a caretaker for a week to watch their dog? Like, that's how you get to Italy without waiting to save $5,000 or $6,000 or whatever it is. And it can apply to owning homes as one that comes up. Like, we think of like the path of most resistance sometimes. It's like, oh, I got to buy a plane ticket, I got to get a hotel, like that adds up to $6,000. Or I got to own a home, but I can't buy a home here in the city that I live in or the zip code because it costs too much. And I'm like, well, what about a place where you might want to own a vacation home or a second home? Like, that could be your first home, and then maybe you rent that out until you get there, and you live in an apartment here still. But like, sometimes we take things so literally, and that's why I think like thinking about the value exchange, value for value, opens the door to non-literal ways, not like paths of least resistance, as opposed to like the path of most resistance, which is often, unfortunately, like what we're marketed. Like, do it this way because there's more profit for the business.
That's
if you
true.
Do it this way.
That's so true. Yeah, there's more profit for the airlines and the hotel companies if you spend the $5,000 getting to Italy.
Sure, because if the entertainment industry had their way, it's like we would all still subscribe to TV and cable through one provider. Netflix came along and disrupted all of that and fragmented all that, but their dream would be, here's the path of most resistance, which is give us the most money with the most profit.
And we'll just keep raising it.
Yeah, versus new ways come into play. So there's always a different path to go. And it may not always be the easiest. It could be bumpy, but we have to stop and think like there's got to be multiple ways to get this done.
I love that. Just looking for, I think the most successful people do strategically figure out how to find the paths of least resistance. I don't think, we talked a little bit about this maybe earlier in the podcast, maybe even off air, about how it's not just about working hard, because not everyone, but most people now that are trying to go somewhere are going to be working really hard, but it's about finding the right things to do. And the more you take the path of least resistance to get something done, the more things you can get done quicker.
Sure. There's a misconception of, in my opinion, of like the 40-hour work week. Like, I think that's long gone, in the sense that like if you want to achieve higher success or get far ahead, if you're starting from zero, like let's say you don't have a trust fund or somebody helping you out, like you're gonna have to work a lot of hours. And there's 7 days a week. Like I said, I'm generally working that much between tennis and everything else going on, but I enjoy it. Like, I enjoy keep going and use all that time to get to the places that you want to go. And I was always one that worked a lot of different jobs and was willing to work multiple jobs, knowing that like the money will help you get ahead and get to the places you want to go. So again, I think social media sometimes can like push this message of like instant success and I can do it my way, or I'm entitled to do it this way. It's like, no, just get out there and work. Like, get the money, get to the steps that you want to go. But most certainly money will always help you get ahead and then find those additional paths. But it's not always going to start as like your dream job. I remember in college, like one of the best things for me was I got out from my undergrad and my master's like completely debt free, which was like huge. And I'm not saying that's easy to do today by any means, because it's not. That's a whole other podcast, I think.
Yeah.
But my point being is like, if you can do that and work and so forth, that opens up more opportunities. If you have money and take those opportunities, like I still remember to this day, and I'm like the least handy person. I can't fix or do anything. I had a friend that's like, hey, we're re-roofing the house this weekend at the house. Like, do you want help? And I'm like, you don't want to give me a hammer or nails. Like, this is dangerous.
Your roof will end up worse.
But I was literally like, how much is it paying? It was like $300. I was like, yeah, I can roof. Like, let's do this. And I think that's like the attitude. It's like, there's money there. Like, go get it. Like, even if it's, sacrificing missing out on a party or whatever it is, or a Netflix show. Like, you got to get out there and do it and put yourself out there. And again, that instance, like, I'm talking about it right now, 20 years later, nearly. Like, I remember being like, I don't know what the heck I'm doing, but I'm going to go roof and I'm going to get this $300.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. Like, I never roofed again, but like, that $300 was very important at that time.
Exactly. It probably just helped you save up and do the next thing you wanted to do.
Yeah. It's, and I don't want anybody to feel like, I don't like, how would I put this? Like, the entitlement around, like, I should have success. And it's like, you will get success, but like, have that focus, have that intention, have that hard work, put into it and have a plan, and like, you will get there. But you're going to have to do other things along the way that are hard, they're difficult, they're not your dream thing that you want to do. But if that goal means that much to you, like, those are the things you're going to have to do.
One other thing kind of tangential to this that we've kind of hit on a little bit, but I wanted to make sure to make a point of. So we talked a little bit off air about kind of finding value in the opportunities or the positions that aren't already your dream job, and figuring out how to help that or to make that take you to the next level. I think that's a really interesting point.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I look at, like, when I worked in software, for instance, I don't know that was the best role for me, per se. I always felt like it was like putting round peg in square hole, right? Where I'm like, I can do this and I can get the job done, but I'm not like great at it, and I'm putting a lot of effort into being just good. Not great.
It's not
like,
flowing
like mediocre.
completely.
Like, this is not naturally happening. So that in and itself was like a learning experience. I'm like, I want to be good at this, and this role pays good and so forth, but like, it's just not happening the way I want it to happen. It's not natural. So that was a big learning lesson. But even taking away from that, like, I made great relationships. I got to go to a country in Eastern Europe and meet awesome new people, awesome new culture, and understand like how all that works over there and what their values are as people, and how they work and so forth. So I got all these good takeaways from the job itself as being like a mediocre feeling.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
There's a lot of friction every day for me to make that effort, and that's why, like, that opportunity made me realize, like, I got to get something that I'm really great at, that I'm very passionate about, that comes more naturally, because then you're gonna put all the work in the world into it because you like it and or maybe love it, and you're good at it. And that's the thing too. It's like sometimes we get stuck in these positions where, like, because we're willing to work so hard, it's sucking a lot out of us because we're just not naturally that great at it, and we don't naturally like it or love it that much. So
yeah,
that was a learning one for me.
I have a couple closing questions I always like to ask on every podcast. And my first one kind of goes back to the entry point of your career. I would say, like, getting into that first traveling job that you mentioned that was event-based. If you could travel back in time and just talk to a younger version of yourself, taking the wisdom and the knowledge that you have now, what are a couple things that you would tell them to do different?
I think when you go into your first job, you think like you just learned all this business school stuff and education. You watch on TV what a business person is. I would say forget about all that. Like, be yourself. Like, you don't think of, I need to act like a professional, what my version, because you don't know what a professional is until you actually become professional. So dropping that, like dropping your guard, and just be who you are and work hard and enjoy it, versus feeling like you have to act like a boss or you have to act a certain way. I see that happen to me, and that happens, I think, to a lot of people in their first position because they've never worked in an office or in that environment before. So that would be the one that's it's like, go in, be yourself. Don't be the TV version of a business professional.
Yeah. It's very funny that you said you don't know what a professional is yet, too, because that's actually my next question. So the show is called Profession Session, and it's because I really enjoy breaking down what it is, the tactics and qualities behind professional greatness, essentially. So my question to you is, what does it mean to you personally to be a professional now that maybe you've learned a little bit more about what it actually is.
Sure. For me, and I'd probably take it to, especially when I start something new, I'll entrench myself in it. Like, I have to create, again, going back to the value, I have to create a strategy. I have to create a plan, even knowing that could pivot, like that model could pivot because you don't know everything up front. So for me, like, being professional is really, we have a game plan, we have a strategy, we're going to put this into play, we'll tweak it as we go. And it's come across life. Like, we're doing it with my daughter's tennis right now, who has very high goals. She's a young lady, now she just turned 10. And so we apply that there, and she's into it. She's part of the plan. She understands it. And, that's the biggest piece. It's like, because again, working hard, that's relatively easy, but like working smart and hard, that's the goal. That's like the end goal.
I think that takes really like removing yourself and like looking at it objectively too.
Right, for sure. Like, it's taking a step back and going, okay, this worked, this didn't work, and learning all the way. And when you're doing something relatively new, like, and usually once you get comfortable is probably when you want to do something new anyways. Like, if you're super type A, have big goals, like, you'll realize one day you're going to work and you're like, I feel comfortable. This feels not right.
Yeah.
And that's me. Like, I'll be like, I feel comfortable. What else do I got to do? I should be doing more work. I'm not saying that's necessarily healthy. I don't know if that is or not, but that's just how I activate. So I always want to look in that place of like, if I feel a certain level of comfort, I probably need to get to the uncomfort zone or push myself a little further somewhere.
I resonate with that. That's funny. The thing that I always think of when I hear someone say something like that is when I first got to UCF for my undergrad. It's a massive gym, huge school, almost like either just under or just over 70,000 people now.
Right.
And a lot of commuters, but a lot of people on campus too. And so I got to this gym and I was kind of learning how to work out when I first got to college. And I remember getting into the gym and everyone in there was way bigger than me. And I was like, this is awesome. I'm in the right place. Like, this is the place to learn. And
Right.
I think like having that perspective and just like trying to put yourself in uncomfortable situations if you have big goals is always going to take you further.
Yeah. And I keep taking back to as a parent, but it's so fun to see kids who are like fearless. I look at my daughter at a tennis match a couple weekends ago, and she played a girl who is much better than her. My daughter just jumped up a division. This girl is a couple years older than her, like was at this point basically a woman, like a professional, like an athlete, if you will. And my daughter still looks like a child. But you look and like she has no fear. Like, she's on the court. She could have, for all intents and purposes, been across from Serena Williams, and she would have not had fear. She would have given every effort she has. And I think, I looked at that, I'm like, gosh, that's what it's like to be young, just to have like no fear, uninhibited because of just ignorance, like ignorant bliss, no anxiety to it, anything. And it's like, how do I get there? Like, it's like, how do I get back to the 10-year-old that took their bicycle and like jumped off this thing, not even thinking about the landing. Like, this is probably the midway through the air. They're like, I'm not going to land this thing. Like, that was us as kids. And so I think sometimes as adults, like, how do I get back there? And I know through learning, like, we learn anxiety and we learn discretion and, our risk tolerance. But like that for me, I was like, gosh, like, a kid can just be there and not worry. And that's like, now I'm starting to think like, how do I be that as an adult? Like,
it's a powerful perspective.
But it's like, how do I pull back and like, gosh, I want that mindset in everything. Like, fear, like, I need to know the outcomes and risk and so forth still, but like that would be the goal. Like, I can do this, I can stand there and then have no negative thoughts come into my mind about not being able to do it.
Yeah, that's where the biggest growth comes from. Yeah.
And that's, I think as an adult, like, that's so hard to do. But, as a parent, like, once you get to this stage, it's like the next stage of growth where you start seeing yourself and your kids, you reflect back to your childhood, your parents and things they did. Like, it's just like a whole other world of growth. And now I'm like, in that utopia right now as my daughter just turned 10. It's like, gosh, like now you're reflecting back on all that, and then you bring it back into your personal life. And
I love that perspective of being able to learn from anyone too. I mean, here you are, you're an adult, your daughter's 10, you said, and you've learned all this stuff throughout a career, but here you are like looking at this person that's 10 years old as someone that you can learn from and someone that you can take a perspective from. I mean,
yeah,
I think that's an important perspective to have.
And it's, again, like taking what you've learned and try to help them, like open up doors. It doesn't mean I'm her coach, but it's like, okay, if you want these goals, which are very lofty goals, let's figure out how to do this. And a lot of times it's like tuning out noise, opinions, and it all finding the right people to help you along the way. And I think we've found a lot of the right people, and that could change in the future, like as you continue to grow. But that's, you bring all this into life. Like, it's not just about your profession or like, it's like, okay, now we're setting these principles for, my daughter's goals, which are cool. And it's not like she knows like the overall strategy or why we're doing it this way per se, but yeah, it just, going back to what you said, like it becomes kind of second nature, and that's just how you move through life.
Love that. On that note, anything else that you would want to share with the audience? Any major takeaways?
Oh, goodness. Well, I guess if you have comments about tennis or tennis parenting, you can message Brody and I'll try to get an answer. That's like I said, a big one for me right now. And again, I think I enjoy being a professor. Like, it doesn't feel like work at all. It feels like I'm in a position where I get to learn, and I also get paid while learning as well, and meet new people. So it's kind of like the coolest paid hobby that I've ever had in my life, is what I would call it. So people are like, how do you find the time? And it's like, no, like when you like what you're doing and you're trying to do more in life, like all these things build on top of each other. And so I would always say, like, if you got time in the day, like, go for it. But there will be a point where your time is so precious that you really got to put a value on it, and understanding what that kind of number, like there's a monetary value to it. There's a time value of taking time away from your family and so forth as well. So when you have to start saying no, like that gets tough, like that, because you want to be able to say yes to everything and everyone. But once you have to start saying no, that's another skill set that you kind of have to learn.
It's a tough one. I'm starting to learn that a little bit.
Yeah, but that would be the big thing, is like figure out what your value is on your time, and then start applying that as well when making choices. So, simple example of that would be, hey, I want to do the bark in my yard, and I can do that, but on the weekend, does it take more time away from my family if I'm spreading the bark and wood chips in my yard than it does to just pay somebody, and I can either spend time with my family or do more work where I get paid. And that's something that I've learned in recent years. I'm like, wait, this doesn't make sense for me to do this.
Yeah.
Like, I like to work hard, but like this isn't making sense for me to work hard.
Well, you had that
moment.
You had the mindset that got you paid for doing the roofing when you were younger.
Right.
That was valuable at the time, but now that's kind of changed a little
now
bit.
I need to pay somebody else to do the roof is the point. So yeah, that's something. And I think that's tough too, because you may kind of like doing that stuff as well. So it's some of those choices where you're like, no, I got to pull back, and I got to spend more time with my family, or I got to spend more time on this particular piece of work that I want to get done. You can't do everything, unfortunately, when you start running out of hours and have people in your life that need those hours as well.
Very true. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a super insightful conversation. We got into some cool stuff.
Nice. I appreciate it. No, it's great.
Awesome. And that's a podcast.